Um, as Aaron said, I'm a lawyer and I describe myself as a management labor and employment lawyer because I represent management. At my last high school reunion, a very close African-American friend, young woman at the time in high school, asked me what kind of law I practice. And I said, Priscilla, I represent companies accused of race discrimination. Well, when she stopped laughing, we had a great talk. I represent companies involved with discrimination cases, wage and hour. I negotiate with labor unions, but I say that to let you know that I represent management. Now I'm going to go one step further. Back in the days when I used to do these kinds of presentations in person, I loved interruptions because hearing myself talk and talk for 45 minutes or an hour, it's boring to me. So I can only imagine what it's like for you. So if I say something that kind of triggers a question, I really don't have a problem with you interrupting or saying, hey, wait, that can't be right. Because a lot of things I'm going to be saying to you today, you will probably be thinking can't be right. So feel free to interrupt. If it gets out of hand, we'll regroup. But otherwise, I'm fine with interruptions. And I'm also fine with questions. Remember, as Aaron said, if you have a particular issue, I will assume that you're not asking about your company, and I'll assume you're asking for a friend. So, but, again, if you want to ask generic questions, we'll just assume you're asking for another member of the association, not for yourself. Okay, now, when Erin gave me the list of topics, she said that the three things that I was going to cover are vaccine mandates, evaluations, work from home, and the dreaded and more. Okay, so let me start with the vaccine mandates and tell you, yesterday I spent the afternoon in bed recovering from my additional dose of Moderna, my third dose. And for those of you, I understand that this group is in Pennsylvania, so I'm not particularly aware of what Pennsylvania is doing right now with respect to the booster for Pfizer and the additional doses for Johnson & Johnson and Moderna. But in Maryland, if you self-report that you're eligible for a third dose of Moderna, they will give it to you, and they're not allowed to ask questions to find out whether you're lying to them. So that's just an aside. Vaccine mandates. According to the Daily Labor Report today, the OSHA regulation that would mandate vaccinations for employers of 100 or more employees has been sent to the White House. So I assume that that's going to be coming sometime soon. That would require all employees of companies with 100 or more employees to be vaccinated or to have regular testing. Now, if you've been following the news, Texas just said it's illegal in Texas for an employer to require vaccinations. So if the regulation is issued, I'm going to be assuming that there are going to be lots of employers in Texas who are violating the law, whether it's state law by mandating it or federal law by not mandating vaccines. So it's going to be a mess. And I think that we need to see how things sort out with respect to the OSHA regulation. With respect to employers who don't have 100 employees, vaccine mandates are legal. You can require all of your employees to be vaccinated. The exceptions are if they have a religious reason for not being vaccinated, and I don't stay up on all of the particular religions that don't allow needles or drawing of blood, but if somebody belongs to a religious group that does not permit vaccinations, that would be an exception. If there's a medical reason why someone can't be vaccinated, allergic reactions, things like that, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that person would likely be subject to an exemption. However, if you mandate vaccines and somebody comes in and says, I get a vaccine out of jail card free because I have this religious exemption or whatever, you can still require that employee to do masking, require them to practice isolation, to do whatever is necessary to isolate them and prevent them from passing on COVID to someone else. As a matter of fact, we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks that a lot of people who are vaccinated are being exposed to people who weren't vaccinated who have COVID. And we're advising under CDC guidelines to isolate. If you've been exposed for 3 days, get your test. And if you test negative, go about your business. But even if you have a vaccine mandate, you can still, and someone isn't vaccinated properly or legally, you can still require them to do all of the protocol that you required prior to the vaccine mandate. All right.
Hey, Frank. Oh, go ahead. Shelley has a question.
Yes.
So just a quick question. So, there's a lot of talk that healthcare will be exempt from testing. If you have a healthcare facility that's 100 or more, you're privately owned, are you exempt from testing?
I haven't seen the final regulation. That may be the case. I don't know why they would necessarily do that, except that I suppose in healthcare institutions that large, their protocols, their masking and shields and all of that would prevent them from transmitting it or acquiring COVID. But it's all a negotiation now. I'm so sick of politics. I want to form a policy in the middle, dedicated to extreme moderation. Okay, but I'm not sure what to call that political party except the shut the hell up party to both the left and the right. Okay, hope that answers your question. Okay, anything else on vaccine mandates? If you think of something, you can come back. But that's pretty much where we stand on vaccines. We've got people fighting. There's polarization. I actually had a cousin of my wife in New Jersey says she'll get vaccinated when she's allowed to carry a firearm under New Jersey law. And I said, well, Brenda, I never really thought of the two together, but whatever floats your boat.
Frank,
Okay.
Frank, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And this is more long-term effect. So if the vaccine mandate can hold water,
Yes.
can that be applied to other vaccinations outside of a pandemic?
Sure. I mean, right now we have vaccination requirements for school children. We have, but workplace has never really gotten to that point. But typically, in a workplace, the person probably has been vaccinated for polio, but you assume that everyone has been vaccinated for childhood diseases, and that's really not a particular problem. COVID is changing the way we think about a lot of things. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting to hear scientists who actually think about these things talking about the risk of doing nothing versus the risk of doing something. And no one seems to be thinking about those two things together. They only think about the risk of doing something. People never worry about the risk of doing nothing, which I guess is one of the problems we have with vaccine mandates. Okay. Evaluations. This is a particular religious, speaking of religious exemptions, this is a religious thing with me. Evaluations of employees will hurt you more than help you if they are not accurate. I have been involved in so many litigations or trials or claims where someone was fired for a good reason And if you looked at their evaluations, you would swear that they were the best employee who ever lived. All right. So I am advising my clients that if you're not going to do evaluations properly and honestly and candidly, don't do them at all. Okay. If you have a problem with telling an employee that, look, you're doing okay, you're doing a fine job, I wish you were more productive, I wish you could do better, you're certainly not as productive as Peter and Aaron, but you're fine for now. That's a proper evaluation. Don't do them at all. If you don't want to hurt Frank's feelings by telling him that he's average, don't use evaluations. And if you are going to use evaluations, I think it's a marketing thing. Almost all the form evaluations I see have ratings, sort of like Amazon ratings, 5 stars, 0 to 5. And, nobody wants to give somebody a 3. Well, according to the law of averages, if you've got 100 employees working for you, 70 to 80% of those people should be 3s. They should be average. And 10% should be 4s, and maybe 10% should be 5. But if all 100s are 5 and 4s, then the evaluations are practically worthless. If you're going to do evaluations, I would just recommend ignoring the ratings and just telling people what they're doing that is good, what they're doing that is not necessarily good, and certainly tell them what they're doing that is ugly, things that need to change, things that we just fired for one of my clients, somebody who had worked for them for 20 years. And everybody who had ever had any dealings with that company couldn't understand why that person was working there in the first place. And we may end up giving that person a substantial amount of money, not only because we kept her around for 20 years, but her evaluations were all 4s and 5s. It would have been helpful if we had just had on there, Frank does okay, but sometimes I wonder why we're paying Frank anything for what he does. Okay, would have made it much more helpful. There should also, if you're doing evaluations, that you should, especially if you're the HR person, and I don't necessarily know who the people are on this call, whether you're HR, whether you're the CFO, whether you're the president, who knows. But there should be comparisons among supervisors so that the HR person says, hey, Peter, everyone you evaluate is getting 5s. And somehow you didn't get the memo because the other supervisors are giving people 3s, sometimes 4s, or that people are actually giving your compatriots in the supervisory realm are doing a better job of differentiating between good, bad, and great employees than you are. You have to do better. All right. Work from home. And by the way, I've got probably 3 days worth of materials here. So don't worry if I get through, the 3 topics that Aaron listed in the next 5 minutes. But the other working from home, as I said to Peter earlier, COVID has changed everything. All right. There was a time, I'm sure, like 3 years ago, if you had said, what do you think of the concept of Apple having virtually 95 to 100% of their workforce working remotely? And if you had asked Tim Cook that, he would say that's absolutely ridiculous. That doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, it has been a tried and true principle under the Americans with Disabilities Act that it is not a reasonable accommodation to a person's disability to have them work from home. All right. Well, guess what? We now have 2 years of evidence that certain people can work from home. So if somebody has a disability that might prevent them from commuting, now it's going to be much more difficult to say, when they say, I want to be accommodated by working from home, saying, well, that's not reasonable, because we now have 2 years of evidence that it's not only reasonable, but I actually have some clients who say, some of my people have been more productive working from home. So that must mean when they're working at the office, they're spending way too much time talking to each other and not enough time doing their work. So that's one of the observations I have about that. One thing about homework is that it is subject to the wage and hour laws, just like showing up at the office. So if somebody is not an exempt employee from minimum wage and overtime, there has to be a way to keep track of their hours. And there has to be a way to keep track that somebody working from home is not working more than 40 hours and then not being paid overtime or not being paid for all the hours they've worked because you're not keeping hours. This goes back to the days when you're supposed to keep track of hours of non-exempt employees. If you don't, then whatever the employee says he or she worked is presumptively correct because you don't have records to refute it. You might be able to refute it by testimony to say, have a half a dozen employees say, yeah, Diane has never been on time the entire 3 years she's worked here, and I've never seen anything but the taillights of her car 5 minutes before quitting time. Then that might be able to demonstrate that her claim that she's worked 50 hours a week for the last 2 years is a lie. But if you're not keeping those records, her records are presumptively correct. Now, the one thing that I haven't seen yet, but it's early yet, if you're at the office and you trip down the stairs coming back from the bathroom, you're subject to workers' comp. If you go to the bathroom when you're doing homework and you trip down the steps and get injured, I can't tell you off the top of my head whether that's a workers' comp claim that would be permitted or not. But again, stay tuned. There are too many lawyers out there. Some lawyer is going to figure it out and he's going to make a little bit of money off it. As a matter of fact, as I said to a friend the other day, I understand that NIH, the National Institute of Health, is going to start using lawyers instead of white rats in their experiments because there are more lawyers than white rats. The lab technicians don't get as attached to the lawyers as they do to the rats. And apparently the lawyers will do things that the rats won't. So with that said, I'm gonna move on to some of the things that I thought would be topics that might generate some questions or some thoughts on your part. This is something I'm constantly asked about. You've already heard me make reference to keeping time records for overtime. When I give seminars on wage and hour law, I frequently will say, I will give $1,000 to anyone willing to bet me $10,000 in return that I can't find a wage hour violation at their company. And I then say, that's a sucker's bet, by the way. Don't take that bet, because I guarantee you that there isn't a single company that isn't somehow inadvertently or in some cases deliberately violating the wage and hour laws. So here's something that a lot of people don't seem to understand, including the most sophisticated. To be exempt from overtime, in almost every instance, the employee must be paid a salary, okay, not hourly. If someone is paid hourly, I don't care how important they are, it is almost impossible to prove that they're exempt from overtime. And only in specific instances can a salaried exempt employee have their pay docked for time off. All right. So if someone is paid a salary, but you dock them for 3 hours that they've taken off in the afternoon to go to the doctors or go to their child's, student teacher conference, that means that they are not salaried and they are entitled to overtime if they work more than 40 hours a week. Okay. The other side of that coin is that the payment of a salary to an employee does not necessarily mean that that employee is exempt from overtime. Okay. That employee must also perform certain duties that are the kind of work that the Department of Labor says qualifies for the exemption, namely executive, supervisory, administrative, like the HR director, the chief financial officer, or that they're a professional, like a doctor or a registered nurse. But if a doctor or a registered nurse is paid on an hourly basis, I believe that the Department of Labor would take the position that they're entitled to overtime, whether that hourly rate is $100 an hour, $10 an hour, I think it's probably too little for minimum wage now, or $1,000 an hour. All right. Also wage an hour. Non-exempt employees must be paid for all hours worked, whether approved or not. That sort of goes in with what I was talking about with the working from home issue of tracking time. If an employee is permitted to work, the employee must be paid for that time, okay, including overtime. So let me give you an example to show where that might come in. Well, I'll give you my example. When I was in college, I worked in a bakery and in the summers, and I didn't smoke or drink coffee in those days. So I would show up to work at 5:45 every morning, and I would punch in and go to work. And every day I would, if I 5-10 minutes to clean up, I would punch out. They never paid me for that 15 minutes that I worked in the morning. All right. They would round it to the 6 a.m. All right. Even if they had said to me, don't punch in, it's okay for you to go to work, but you're not allowed to punch in before 6 o'clock, I was still entitled to that money. All right. So do not assume you're safe if your records show that that person punched in at 6 o'clock and punched out at 2 p.m., therefore only had 8 hours of work, or 9 to 5 or whatever your hours are. If you permit them to go to work earlier or you permit them to stay later. Also, as I've pointed out, there is no exception for people who do bad work and have to be redone. So if somebody does something poorly and they have to stay late to fix it, if they are not exempt, you have to pay them for the time, even though they're the ones who generated the overtime. And something again that people don't know is that breaks of less than 20 minutes have to be compensated. So we generally tell employers that if you're going to give a lunch break, or give a break that you don't want to compensate them for, make sure it's 30 minutes or more. Back in the days before smoking was banned in every workplace, people smoked at their desks. after the smoking ban, people started taking what I called the entitled smoke break. Walk outside, take 5-10 minutes. And I had a client call me up and say, I want them to punch out to go smoke and punch back in because I don't want to pay them for the smoke break. And I said, okay, you can make them punch in and you can make them punch out. But if it's less than 20 minutes, it's not a uncompensated break. You got to pay them anyway. And he said, that's not fair. That's ridiculous. And I said, you're right. It's not fair. It's ridiculous, but it's the law.
Similar to COVID, Frank, similar to COVID, could we add up multiple times when people go out and smoke and see if it's greater than 20 minutes? And not, I'm only kidding.
Okay, but you know what? That's a perfect segue for me saying I typically have clients come up with these great ideas for getting around the law. And I frequently have to tell them the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938. If you don't think that employers have come up with every possible way to get around it and that the Department of Labor hasn't dealt with that directly, you're crazy. Okay, so yes, there's probably a regulation out there, just like for those of you who are in the HR business or deal with employee handbooks, I frequently review employee handbooks to make sure they're legal. And every now and again, I will come up, I'll see something in there and it's just out of left field. It's a policy that I've never seen anywhere else. And I go to the client and I say, okay, tell me the name of the employee that caused you to adopt this policy. All right. And they said, well, it was so-and-so and we weren't going to let it happen again. All right. So don't overreact just because one employee tries to get over on you. All right. Independent contractors. Okay. Again, rule of thumb. If somebody comes to me and asks me whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor, what I typically say is, well, if you had to ask, they're probably an employee. But let's talk about it. All right. Independent, if somebody is doing the work of a regular employee and they're not employed by a temporary agency, okay, or someone who is actually employing them, an independent company, they are not an independent contractor. So if you're doing the work, if somebody comes to you, understand you're medical, someone says, look, I want to do work for you, but I want to be an independent contractor. I want $100 an hour. I'll sign whatever document you want and say that there's not going to be any withholding and you save money on the FICA and all of that. If you hire somebody as an independent contractor to do the work of an employee, I'm 99.9% sure that they are not an independent contractor. And the risk is that if you're not making workers' comp contributions on their behalf, if they're injured, it could be illegal employment. The IRS could come to you and say, you weren't doing withholding, you weren't paying FICA. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the net that you paid, treat that as net, and gross up the amount and say you're responsible not only for the FICA, but his FICA and the withholding. And I've seen that happen. So if you've got independent contractors, look into it, get a legal opinion, do your best to make sure that they're not in fact employees. Also, this is something that somehow comes up. And again, this is one of those things in the category, you gotta be kidding, is if you've got a person who says, hey, look, I know you're paying, Jones Company to mow your lawn, to mow the lawn outside the building, but I'll do it after hours for, $30 an hour or something like that. And you just pay me in cash. Okay. The Department of Labor and the IRS would take the position that when an employee does after hours work, even though it's not their regular job, they're probably an employee as well. Now, if that employee has a lawn company, or that employee has a side business of painting interiors, and you hire that company to paint the interior, and they happen to send that guy to do the work, then it's different. But hiring a day worker to do work at night does not make that person an independent contractor. Okay. Discipline and discharge. Whenever you are disciplining an employee, especially discharge, never, ever, ever say you're sorry, you feel bad, you wish you didn't have to do it. Anything that suggests that you were less than 100% behind that decision. Okay, I have been involved in so many cases where someone was fired and the employer messed it up in the execution by saying, I feel awful about this, wasn't my decision. Peter insisted that you be fired, just anything so they didn't feel bad about actually firing somebody. And it only makes the job of defending that termination if a claim of discrimination or a wrongful termination action is brought. And how does that happen? Well, it happens like this. Okay. Mr. Kollman, when you fired Mr. Jones, you told him you felt bad, didn't you? Well, yes, I did. You felt bad because you were doing it because he was black, correct? No, that's not. No further questions. All right. So when you say anything that suggests that you don't have a good reason or that you feel badly about it, you are opening it up to allegations that there are other reasons. This is the one thing that I have to tell my clients. I try to be evangelical and say, if you're going to be in management, if you're going to be dealing with employees, get over feeling bad. You have to be proud of what you do. You have to be, you have to drink from the management Kool-Aid and say, it's not my fault that this guy failed to do the job. It's not my fault that this person called somebody a nasty name or used a racial epithet. It's not my fault. Therefore, I don't need to apologize about any action that I'm taking against them. Okay. And just so you know, my credentials, I have fired people. And it's still a bit of a legend around here that many years ago, I had a person working for me when they called them secretaries, not legal assistants. And she was causing trouble everywhere else. She did a great job for me, but she was causing disruption throughout the law firm. So I talked to my two partners and I said, unless one of you objects, I'm going to fire Helen today. And they said, go for it. So I brought her in and I started, as I tell my clients to do, Helen, I've talked to you on several occasions about your inability to, and I started, she stopped me and she says, I think I know where this is going. Why don't you just get to it? And I said, okay, Helen, you're fired, 2 weeks severance. And she left. And about 30 seconds later, my partner and best friend, Pete Saucier, rushes in. He said, you didn't fire Helen, did you? And I said, yeah, just done. He says, it's Secretary's Day. All right. So, oh, well, now they call it Legal Administrative Assistant Day. But yeah, so no one seemed to ask whether they were going to get flowers or gift certificates on Secretary's Day for a while after that. But I know it's tough. I know it's difficult to fire somebody, but do it. That's why you're in the position that you are. Okay. Rule of thumb, nothing goes in an employee's personnel file that they haven't seen. Preferably also given a copy. All right. There is no such thing as double secret probation. Again, it gets back to the concept, don't be embarrassed. If you think that something is important enough to put in somebody's personnel file, it's important enough for you to tell them and show them and perhaps give them a copy. Because again, you know, during the discrimination trial, you don't want to be able to say, have the lawyer for them say, but you never gave them a copy, did you? All right, so do that. All right. Something that if I don't surprise a few of you people on this call, it'll be the first time ever. Under the National Labor Relations Act, you cannot prohibit non-supervisory employees from discussing their wages and working conditions. Okay, so if your employee handbook says employees are not allowed to discuss their salaries or, you know, benefits with other employees, that is a violation of the National Labor Relations Act. Now, if you're a supervisor, and since you're on this Zoom call, I'm assuming that you are under the National Labor Relations Act, your employer can fire you for discussing your salary. Okay, but if you're not a supervisory employee, you have protections under the National Labor Relations Act. So if your handbook has a non-disclosure policy, it's against the law. Disciplining employees for discussing, and I'm talking about non-supervisory, and even if you're in a non-union setting, disciplining them for discussing wages and hours and working conditions is a violation of the National Labor Relations Act. And by the way, the current president, graduate of the same law school as I went to, has said that he is the most pro-union president ever. And if I saw Joe again, I've talked to him a few times. As a matter of fact, I spent 20 minutes chatting with him at a field hockey camp where we were both registering our daughters many years ago. He was only a senator in those days. I would say to him, well, you may have met the most anti-union lawyer you've ever met. Okay, not that unions haven't had done some decent things in our history, and there may actually be some people who are pro-union on this call. I just happen to find that the only employers who should have a union are employers who don't know how to treat their employees properly. And if you are treating your employees properly, what do they need a union for? As a matter of fact, most of my clients who are non-union stay that way by doing better than having a union around telling them that they can or cannot do certain things, right? Getting back to the disclosure, this is something I tell people all the time. If you're inclined to say something to an employee and tell them to keep it a secret, there are no secrets in the workplace. You are deluding yourself to think that if you tell somebody something, it's not going to get out. As Benjamin Franklin said, 3 can keep a secret as long as 2 of them are dead. All right. I've alluded to this in the evaluation section, is that it's better to deal with employee performance problems before you reach the boiling point. All right. And I say that not just because I want to be able to go into a courtroom and say to the jury, Mr. Jones was warned, he was given a bad evaluation, and 2 months later, he was terminated because he didn't improve, as opposed to he got bad evaluations for 20 years and finally enough was enough. All right. Although I think I could pull that off sometimes. By keeping a poorly performing employee, you hurt morale. Okay. And this is something that I have seen in almost every workplace, is that people tend to gravitate toward the mean. All right. If you have 2 great employees and 5 lousy employees, I think it's more likely at the end of a year, you're going to have 7 lousy employees than 7 great employees influenced by the 2 great people that you have. You may, if you're lucky, still have 2 great employees and 5 not so great employees, but poor employees hurt morale, and it's better to deal with the problem sooner rather than later. As a matter of fact, I have found frequently that the employees who my clients worry are going to be bothered by a termination will come to them and say, "Thank you for firing Frank Kollman. I'm tired of cleaning up after his work. I don't know what took you so long, but thank you, thank you, thank you." All right. So don't wait until it's too late to do something. Okay. Something you may or may not know. OSHA, or the state agency that in Pennsylvania, I believe, has OSHA. So in Pennsylvania, it would be federal OSHA. But in Maryland, it would be MOSH. In Virginia, it would be VOSH. But OSHA is not allowed to enter your workplace without a warrant unless you let them. Okay. Repeat that. OSHA is not allowed into your workplace without a warrant unless you let them. So if somebody shows up, shows their credentials and said, "I'm with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I want to go back and inspect your facility, and I want to talk to your employees," and you're quivering in your boots because they are a government employee and I can't say no to them, if you allow them in, you have waived the right to insist they get a warrant. So you should immediately, and this is what I counsel my clients, first thing is say, "Not so fast. Why are you here? What are you doing? What do you intend to do?" And say, "Look, I can't allow you in until I talk to our lawyer to find out whether it is appropriate, because we just don't allow anybody to come into our facility with a badge or a hard hat without finding out why and making sure that they're entitled to come in." Okay, I have been practicing OSHA law as well as management, labor, and employment for nearly 45 years. OSHA was passed in 1970 under a Republican administration, by the way. So Democrats aren't the only ones who pass pro or anti-employer or pro-employee laws. I have never, when we've refused to allow the OSHA person to come in without a warrant, I have never had them go and get a warrant, because we've always been able under those circumstances to work something out. So if it turns out that it's an employee complaint claiming that there's a strange odor coming from this lab, and we say, "Okay, we're not going to require you to get a warrant, but we will only allow you in to come in and inspect the lab and do that," we almost always, OSHA, rather than go get a warrant, will agree to the limited inspection. So that's something you need to know. If you let somebody in to inspect, they are legally required to cite you for whatever conditions they find. No matter how nice you are to them, no matter how much coffee you gave them, no matter how many donuts you allowed them to eat out of the break room, they are required to cite you for anything they see. But if they don't see it, they can't cite you because they can't prove that that existed. All right. Words matter in the workplace. Okay. If you are drafting documents, whether they're employee related, personnel documents, human resources, okay, do not write like a lawyer. Okay. Lawyers are notorious for writing crap that is unhelpful, that gives them so many ways out. We use words like vague, unsatisfactory, unacceptable, and tell me what that means. Okay, John was fired for unacceptable behavior. I don't know what that means. I can't, that isn't helpful. But John was fired for dropping his pants and telling his supervisor to kiss his butt. And if he said ass, put ass on the write-up. That is how you should write. So write like a business person, write like a medical professional. Do not write like a lawyer. Describe what happened. That's the joke that a person is in an air balloon and they're lost, and he sees a guy riding a bike on the ground below, and he yells down, he says, "Excuse me, can you tell me where I am?" And the person on the bicycle says, "You're in a balloon." And the guy said, "Must be a lawyer," because his answer was absolutely accurate, but completely useless. Okay, so don't give completely useless information. State the facts simply and directly. Okay, I'm sure all of you have the posters posted that you need to have posted in the workplace, but if you don't, get them, put them up. Because if you don't have those posters advising employees of their rights under the discrimination laws, wage and hour, whatever, you can be sued for a longer period of time than the law allows. Because the argument is that if employees don't know that they have 2 or 3 years to bring a claim, then we're going to give them 4 or 5 years to do a complaint. Okay. If you promote a supervisor because they were a great employee, you run the risk of losing a great employee and having a bad supervisor if you don't make sure that that employee has the skills and training to be a supervisor. Okay. When you're looking for a good employee, you want somebody who's focused, get the work done, no nuance. This is, I go from point A to point B at the most direct route. Supervisors don't do that. Supervisors have to go from point A to C, maybe to D before they get to B, because they have to deal with employees. You don't want a supervisor who doesn't know how to talk to employees. You don't want a supervisor who says, "What? Are you stupid? It's as simple as this. This is all you have to do. I asked you to do this, and I don't understand why it's not done. Get it done." All right. What you're going to have is you're going to have a revolt, and you may have a union, because that employee is going to say, "They don't treat me properly. The supervisor, berates me," and all of that. So if you're going to be promoting somebody because they're a great employee, give them some training, make sure they understand how to be a good employee. Here's something that I hope you know, but you may not. The Americans with Disabilities Act is the one that protects employees with physical and mental disabilities from discrimination, and requires the employer to engage into providing reasonable accommodations to the disability. Something that employers don't frequently understand or know is that under the ADA, you are required, even though you are absolutely positive that there is no way that you can accommodate an employee's disability, okay, that you have to engage in what's called the interactive process. You have to sit down with the employee and discuss their ideas for reasonable accommodation, so that at the end of the day, when you say there was no accommodation we could agree to that was reasonable, you can also say, and we engaged in the interactive process with the employee to see whether they had a good idea. And in that interactive process, you're supposed to consider whether there's another job at the facility that the employee may be qualified to fill. If you've got a facility elsewhere, whether there's a facility elsewhere where they might qualify for an opening, but you have to engage in the interactive process. Now, I've got a couple more things here if I need to vamp, but let me look down in the chat and see. Okay, I've already answered, will healthcare be exempt from testing? Aaron said, please feel free to interrupt. Only Peter had the gall to interrupt. I'm a little disappointed, but if we do this again, please do it. Okay. Okay. Someone asked about the variants, and you can be vaccinated and have a breakthrough, acquisition of COVID. There are, a lot of other Greek letters that, for other variants besides Delta. The vaccine mandate is based on the best available science, I think, and a discussion of what the risk and the benefits are. And when I'm dealing with employment law questions such as that, I say, well, isn't it stupid having a vaccine mandate when it may not even cover the variants that are coming, that are going around? And I say, yeah, but a stupid law is still the law. And if a vaccine mandate is required, it's not up to you to conclude, well, yeah, it's stupid because it's not effective. There are plenty of laws out there that were designed to do things that had just the opposite effect. And you're still required to abide by them, unfortunately. Okay. Talk to your employees about the business. There's nothing worse than keeping employees in the dark. If there's anything going on that you think employees should know, might like to know, because it might make them feel a little more esprit de corps about where they work, by all means, let them know. Again, it can be birthdays, it can be any number of things, but communicate with them. I have a business partner who used to work for one of the largest law firms in the world, and he said he loved it there. Nobody talks to anybody, everybody leaves them alone. And he said, you sit in your office and you work all day. And I said, that has to be the most awful place on earth to work. All right. So if that's your preference, that's fine. But I think that employees want to know what's going on. And there's a real benefit to quelling rumors before they get completely out of hand. Never act in anger. Make sure that your supervisors never act in anger. It's a very, very tried and true method of suspending an employee pending possible termination. If somebody does something that gets you so angry you can't see straight, you send them home. You're suspended indefinitely until we decide what we're going to do with you. That's fine. That'll give you time to kind of figure it out. Every now and again, you may find information that you decide not to terminate them, okay? But it also gives you the opportunity to get the information so that when you finally call them, you can say, I did a thorough investigation. It turns out that your fingerprints were all over the baseball bat that was used to hit the supervisor in the knee. So therefore, we're concluding that you were the one who hit the supervisor. All right, I actually, one of my, and it looks like I'm almost out of time. One of the cases I'm most proud of proving is that in order to prove discrimination, an employee has to prove that a non-minority was treated differently in discipline, okay? And I had a case many years ago where we fired an African-American woman, my client, for hitting her supervisor in the jaw and knocking her over a table, almost knocking her out. That's a slam dunk, right? Well, it turns out that 6 months earlier, a white male employee had pulled a knife on a supervisor and was not fired. All right. So it made it a little difficult for me to show that there was a difference. Why we fired the African-American employee for hitting, but didn't fire the white employee for pulling a knife. Turns out that it wasn't a knife. It was a razor cutter, and the supervisor had actually provoked the employee, but I had to investigate the whole circumstance. And it would have been helpful if I had known ahead of time that they had had a case where an employee was not fired for engaging in an act of violence against a supervisor. And perhaps that's one of the instances that I'll close with, is that you should all have a lawyer. You should all have somebody that you can call, and there are plenty of management labor lawyers. You can search Martindale Hubbell, you can search Google, find a competent management labor lawyer, interview them, don't pay for the interview, and have someone that you can call every time you've got a dicey employment situation, so that that person can help walk you through it and give you the best way to handle it, so that I'm not doing, or he's not doing, or she's not doing later on, why did you say that? And why didn't you say this?
Frank, I do have one more question for you. Is for everything you've touched on and for all the changes that we've incurred, during the course of the pandemic, what do you think is going to be here long term? In some, dare I say the word variant, but in some iteration, what do you think is going to be long term as a result of what we've done through the pandemic?
Ooh, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to get some bad laws and some bad reactions based on politics. What I think is going to happen is, and I'll get on my soapbox since you gave me the opportunity. The biggest criticism I hear of science is what I think is the great thing about science, is that science is always questioning its conclusions. It gets new facts, it gets new data, it changes its mind, okay? I forget who it said, he says, when I get new facts, that change my opinion, is that I change it, I do it differently. What do you do? So I think what's going to happen is, as long as, people don't embrace science and the concept of, hey, we're doing the best we can. We were wrong about the masks early. We were wrong about this. Turns out, until we do that, I think we're just going to see left-wing and right-wing politics, and we're going to be having people answer questions like that. It says, I have no idea what they're going to do, except somebody is going to make a law. And on that, I said, I actually didn't do this. This is something I used to have posted in my office. In the absence of a rule, use common sense. In the absence of common sense, ask somebody to create a rule. All right. So use your common sense, follow the science. If you need a rule, you've already failed. Do your best at making it a good rule. Okay.
Marie said she just sent a message to be sure that their 20+ offices have all their labor posters up. So
Good.
So they're working on it already. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I appreciate your time and your energy, and the advice that you've given, the help that you've given all of our friends. Peter, you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you, Erin. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you've enjoyed the 5+ hours of education that we've offered in this virtual summit over today and yesterday. I want to thank Erin for the preparation, the execution, the planning, the preparation and execution, and soon the wrap up of this 2-day event. And I also want to extend a thanks to Shelley and the members of the Pennsylvania MGMA Education Committee that have worked to bring about this virtual summit. On behalf of the Pennsylvania MGMA Board of Directors, we have tried to meet in person. However, just the nature of the beast, we'll leave it like that, or the 3 words that my wife wants to see printed on the t-shirt to make millions, due to COVID, ... We're unable to meet in person. We do hope that next year, 2022, will be a year that we can meet either in mid to late spring or fall. It just depends on how everything else goes. In the interim, I wanted to take a moment and ask the 20-some individuals that are on this call to just get an assessment of how things are with your practice, what's going on in the area. Are there any particular challenges or challenges that you're facing? Any particular questions that you may have that we can tap into the many years of resources that are on this call. So I'd like to open it up. I realize it's just Erin and I looking at one another, and everyone else are little black Zoom squares with muted buttons in the left-hand corner. Name. There we go. We have another one. Yay, Michelle. But I get it. We're all in the office. We're all doing things, or we're all at home. There's Melissa. Oh, if I keep on badgering all of you, you will all turn your video cameras on. But I do want to open it up and just get an assessment of where. Come on, there's Angie now. All right, so now we've got Angie. All right, let's do this. This has got to be like the board's got to light up. Okay, I think David's coming in now. That's good. So I should have done this when Frank was talking, but that's okay. All right, cool. Anyone else want to show their face? It's okay, really. We've done this before. You're not going to. This isn't the first. This isn't the last time. And you can create whatever background you want. Erin's on the other side of this wall with the door closed so that we don't have an echo going on. So and it's just one of those situations. So, okay. So here's Marie. Marie has a challenge. And for those of you who remember, by the way, when I used to do the Let's Make a Deal door prize session at the exhibit hall, and I used to badger those who had yellow badges, and I used to tell them, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to win a raffle prize. I could say to Marie, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to pose your question because you're not showing your video, but I won't do that. I won't do that. So Marie posts as a challenge, recruitment of staff and the potential to lose 1/3 of current staff if vaccine requirement is mandated. I open it up to everyone. I know I've had some discussions with some of the board members and the executive committee, but I open it up. What are you guys seeing as well in your area? And you do have to click the unmute button so we can hear you.
We have not mandated it yet, just because our doctors are so nervous that if we do mandate it, we'll lose a lot of good employees, and there just aren't enough employees out there to make up for that right now. People aren't working yet. They're not, I don't know if it's that, I know that the extra money from unemployment is over, so I don't know if it's just still being afraid to go out into the workplace because of COVID or what it is, but we're not ready to jump back on yet.
Okay. Anyone else want to share what's going on?
Peter, this is David. I work for WellSpan Health, which is a large multi-hospital integrated delivery system. And we've noticed we have 2 practices that are in the process of joining our health system. And in both cases, we had what I would call significant number of employees choose not to come from the private practice world into employment of a health system because of the COVID mandate, which I think surprised probably most people in the organization. We didn't probably perceive that it would be as controversial as it's turned out to have been. So just an observation to share with folks.
Thank you, David. We've heard the stories or read the stories of what's coming down. In particular, I think the months of October and through mid-November, there's a lot of governments, agencies, federal, state, local, et cetera, that are implementing some sort of date in October, November, and a lot of stuff that's going on, emergency, first responders, and so forth. So I don't, again, not getting any political here. It's just, I think we're all trying to figure out how to get through this. I think Frank's comment about we have to understand that science is a continuous experiment. until such point as there is nothing else to question, that you feel that you have reached the answer. But science continually is meant to ask questions and to take us somewhere else. And I think in the absence of common sense, as you mentioned, everybody just has taken this and gone political. And I think it's just it's having its effect across the board with that. Anyone else have a comment, or anybody else having issues in terms of staffing, recruiting, or finding people who want to work? It was interesting.
We're having a lot of problems. My clinical staff in one of my practices is down 20%. We are searching for a long time to get people. We have people that no-show for interviews, and we're doing them via Zoom. So and then we're also doing an assessment, which is kind of a personality assessment, and the scores for some of these people, it just makes me question if they aren't purposely trying to fail the assessment, because they'll report a 0 score back, and it's 0 to 100 on their values. How does someone have no values whatsoever? I just don't. I challenge that.
Yeah, even some people that we always thought, they don't have any personality, they're going to register a 5 or a 10 or a 15 out of 100, not necessarily a 0. My mother-in-law used to say, oh, he's toast, he has no personality. But on a Richter scale, she'd still give him a number greater than 0. So,
yeah.
She's right. People they're just doing it on purpose so that they don't have to come. And I can't tell you how many no-shows we get. I schedule 5 or 10 interviews, and I get 2 maybe that show up.
Wow.
It's a wasted day.
And
and then the people that show up, do people not realize that it's still an interview? You don't wear your ripped jeans and a dirty t-shirt.
Sweatshirts. Yeah, or your sweatpants. The best is when they come in leggings, and I'm like, or yoga pants. And I'm like, get out of my office. I can't even look at you.
You need to tell them this is not Zoom. This is not Zoom where you're wearing from the torso up. There was a video, a little sidetrack, but related. Somebody made a video of when we go back to the office, except this one guy goes back to the office, but he still thinks he's Zooming. So he's bad-mouthing someone who's sitting right there in front of them. And then finally, somebody's yelling back at him, do you hear me? Do you hear me? And he holds up a sign, your 40 minutes free Zoom is up, and it's just hysterical to the things that you're mentioning. It's quite interesting interview processes. And I interviewed someone, and we were talking about a particular position, and for communications, and the person said, well, I'm not going to look for content. I think somebody should give me the content. And I was just looking at going, but that's your job. Like, that's what you do. You're supposed to put a newsletter together. That means you're going to have to go out and search for some content, whatever. It was just interesting that the dynamic is there. And I don't understand, Tracy and Andrew brought this up. I don't understand why people are not showing up. Is it for fear of COVID, or is it just they don't care? They're not, what is it? Is it a generational thing? I have no idea. I mean, if I ever not showed up for a job interview, even when I was 12, my father would kick my butt. I mean, it was as simple as that. You're delivering newspapers, get on that job interview.
I don't think it's a generational thing. I've seen it across all ages.
Okay.
I just think it's the new, I don't know if it's their new normal or their new thought of what jobs are or what the interview process is now. They literally they don't care. They just don't care.
And related to all this, Eileen wrote that the ability to recruit employees and the burnout of the employees we currently have is a huge concern on our practice. Because clearly, if you're down, whatever percentage of employees, your current employees are taking the brunt of it. And I'm going to throw one more thing in there so we can talk about. Brittany says, I hear a lot of employees talking about other facilities offering more hourly. How are we keeping current employees at their current wages? So, and I think that was something, it goes back to early, well, mid-COVID or whatever. And one of the governors responded to a question is, how are we supposed to keep our employees going? He says, pay them more money. He says, how do we pay them more money if we don't have any customers because we're shutting our doors? So what are not divulging anything, but are practices rethinking their wage scale? What are you dealing with in terms of burnout? And it just so happened that this past Monday was National Mental Health Day. What are your thoughts? Anybody want to share what they may be doing in that regard in terms of just looking at wages? You don't have to promote anything, just looking at wages, or how you're handling burnout.
Peter, this is Paul, and I apologize, everybody. I'm on my desktop this morning, so I don't even have the video available. Otherwise, I'd turn that on. But I did want to comment on the issue of wages and what I'm finding, and it sounds like this is what others are experiencing as well. Yes, I'm definitely, like everybody's mentioned, having trouble even finding qualified candidates, and also experiencing that in order to have them agree to take a position, that the hourly wage that they're looking for is, in some cases, several dollars more per hour than what some of the current employees are receiving. And as was alluded to by Frank, even though I always encourage the employees not to share information, it just always somehow gets out. So it has created a challenge because the employees that are here find out, oh, well, so-and-so just started and I found out they're making this much per hour. And so it's a real challenge. It really is. A, trying to find qualified people, and then B, what I'm finding we have to pay them in order to get them to take the position.
And as we learned from Frank, you cannot prevent employees from talking about their salary at all. Okay, how are we dealing with, mental health, absent the burnout, just the mental health of the employees? Recently, I had a discussion with one of the committees, the Pennsylvania MGMA committees, and we were talking about how post-pandemic, we could see that there may be some issues that we'd have to deal with. I'm not trying to equate it as such, but like post-traumatic stress syndrome is like post-pandemic syndrome of some sort, because people have either been locked in homes or offices or what have you. They've been separated from more personal, interactive workplaces and environments and so forth. Anyone looking at, morale / other issues related to employees? Nope. Okay. Okay, Eileen says, our practice tries to do productivity bonuses. However, we are all limited to insurance reimbursement, and we cannot increase our reimbursement for services to help offset the increase in wages for employees. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a very, healthcare is a very catch-22 type of situation. You want to do certain things, but there's a lot that's outside your control, namely all the agreements and the contracts and so forth that you sign in terms of reimbursement. And then you have to work within those constraints. Good point.
We have goals, and one of the goals that each team has is in regard to team activities. And we've been given a budget of a very minimal amount of money to have team activities, and then you're supposed to take pictures and post them in Halogen, which is where we record all of our goals, just to try and promote teamwork and, recognize people for things that they do and have celebrations. We have MDI boards, and one area of the MDI board is supposed to be for that team to put whatever they want to put up there. So if they celebrate birthdays or anniversaries or marriages or whatever. So we're looking at that. I think something that came out yesterday that was a huge one for me and my team members is that we found out that we're going to be closed on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And that's huge because it's usually the opposite message that comes that no, we're not going to be closed on this holiday because we didn't get any time off for the 4th of July this year. So that was a really big morale booster for everybody. They were all very happy with that. And I was happy to go around and tell everybody personally that I found that out. That's a really small thing, but you know, given the circumstances, that makes a difference.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. They also tried to do an employee appreciation day and they had food trucks come in
Okay.
and set up. Unfortunately, it happened to be a day where there was this horrendous storm that came through and they had to close it down early. So a lot of employees didn't get to attend at all. And they're supposed to be doing something to make up for that. But that kind of had a negative impact for a lot of people who didn't get, but I mean, it couldn't, you know, it was just one of those things.
Yeah, Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Right. What are anybody else? I coming across other issues. I know someone had posted, believe it or not, in 2021, we still are dealing with physician behavior. Not that everything that we're dealing with is all employee related. How are your physicians dealing with, I don't want to say the pandemic at large, but the effects of the pandemic on the business side of things, let alone the clinical side? And how has their behavior changed? Anybody care to share? We can unrecord this portion if you prefer.
I can pause the recording. It's okay.
My physicians have actually gotten better. They're more open.
No, I made that.
That's interesting. Okay.
And I'm struggling with Terry, can you close the door? I'm struggling with the interactions with the staff. And when we talk about, you know, retaining and recruiting staff, and then they get chastised by the physicians on the floor in front of colleagues or even in front of patients, it's complicated. It's difficult. I mean, they don't own the practice. And so, you know, the physicians can't, just a couple, and it's all it takes, right? One bad apple, as they say. But believe it or not, this morning I had to get up from this conference and go out and speak to a physician who had made 2 nurses cry. And I don't back down from it, but damn it, I don't want to do that kind of stuff. But I have to behave. I can't go out there. So I don't blame the pandemic for this, but I do blame the pandemic and the physicians for creating a staffing problem because of the way they interact with staff.
Mm-hmm. Which was an issue even pre-pandemic. It just may have changed, obviously, with the pandemic. I know those war stories.
It changes because it's harder to recruit right now.
Right. And since you're going to have employees that talk with one another, and even potential employees, they're going to say, well, watch out for Dr. So-and-so because he's going to berate you in front of everybody in the waiting room.
Yes.
Or whatever. Right. And well, that person's going to walk right out the door and not accept your job offer. So,
right.
Yep.
So what I've done is, in an effort to try and address it, is that I take my 5'2" self right out there and go toe to toe with the doctors, and then I take it to the board. And and what the board has been doing is 2 members of the board, all physicians, they'll schedule a meeting with these physicians and talk about their behavior. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a short-lived victory and they have to do it again, but it gets into the board minutes and things like that. And so, in terms of hostile work environment, things like that, I've got documentation that we tried to address it, for what it's worth.
Well, take what Frank said. He's the doctor, the physician's an employee, right? Is write something up and say, by the way, here's your copy, and we're putting it in your folder. You created a hostile work environment for our employees today. It's dated and it's signed, and here's your copy.
I think
I'm
that's a-
sure the physician's going to be like, who do you think I am? But it's okay. You'll at least startle them and go, yeah, you can't do that. You
Right.
shouldn't do that. So for those of you who participated in this two-day event, I thank you on behalf of the Pennsylvania MGMA Board of Directors. I know that there are a number of individuals who wanted to register so they have access to the recordings and presentations, albeit could not be here in person, which is fine. That's what we've tried to accommodate everyone's situation to the best that we can. So watch for an email that will come out, and Erin will make sure that you have access to the presentations and the recordings for those that you may not have been able to attend. And on behalf of the board, I thank you all for your attendance in these 2 days. Always stay well, be safe, and we look forward to 2022 when we can meet in person. I'm going to take a moment because I see Tracy's back on here video. Tracy has been a member of the board of directors. We're going to do a little something here because at least we have more than just the board members present. Tracy has been a member of the board of directors, I'm just going to say, for a long time. I'm going to leave it like that. Tracy, I think you're happy with that one. But Tracy not only has been an at-large director, she's gone through the succession planning of secretary to vice president and president. And for the past 2 years, she has been president. And her term comes to a close on December 31st, 2021. She is the first president, as far as I know, anyway, in 12 plus years, I think, with Pennsylvania MGMA, to not be able to have an in-person conference or an in-person board meeting. We were discussing this yesterday, as a matter of fact, that the last time we met was November or December 2019, and it seems even longer than that. So I just want to say that we're going to make sure that we have an in-person event next year. There'll probably be a reception just for Tracy. And then Shelley, who had to drop off this call because it was an IT issue, who'll be president. She can handle the conference part. Tracy will be the host and the honoree of a reception, because I'm sure she's going to need that after the 2 years. But I just want to say, Tracy, we appreciate everything that you've done for the association over the 2 years. And in particular, over the last 2 years, your message from the chair, which for some of you, you should know, Tracy has written every one of those articles on her own. And some of those messages really hit home, especially early on. And I referenced one of them. I said to her back May, June of last year, I said I'd like to use parts of it for other newsletters that we were doing with clients, because it just hit home. So Tracy, we will raise a toast to you next year in person, without a doubt. But thank you for your service to Pennsylvania MGMA. Just so you know, you're not going away for another 2 more years, because you'll be serving as past president. But we wanted to let that be known. Shelley will be president, and Michelle Burris, congratulations, was elected yesterday formally as our vice president, and she will her term will begin on January the 1st. And Patty, are you going to turn your video on for a moment? She may not, but there's Patty. Am I allowed to say something, Patty? Okay, so Patty is going to retire, something we all aspire to, March, I believe it is, March 31st, 2022, after many years at the one practice. You can unmute if you want to tell us. I'm just trying to be nice. But Patty's going to retire after a number of years in healthcare. So
33 years.
33 years with a practice.
Yes.
And think about how many practices we've all jumped to in our tenure. So Patty, we certainly wish you all the best. And we will honor you as well with Tracy next year at a reception, because we need to. Patty has represented the western portion of the state of Pennsylvania on the board of directors, has done so for many years. She's been on a co-chair of the membership committee, and has served the Pennsylvania MGMA greatly, and we're going to miss her on the board as her term comes to a close on December 31st, and we're going to miss her, though, as a colleague. But save the date once we know it, once Erin has a contract that we're going to sign. Save that date because we're going to want to see you there. And I think those are the announcements. For those of you who want to be involved on committees, please, I know we have some committee volunteers here. David is a director. Angie is on a committee. Melissa Kwiatkowski is on the board and committees. Paul leads our legislative effort. So please, if you want to be involved, just email info@pennsylvaniamgma.com. And with that, it is 11:34 Eastern Time. Erin, I think I've done what I needed to do. Is that correct? I take my orders from Erin at a conference.
Yes, thank you all for attending and for engaging with everyone and our speakers. Yep, Peter, you're off the hook.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe. And thank you, Erin.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you.
Bye.